Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's nice to see all of you here. I was wondering how many people were going to show up, and I'm so happy that we have a nice, healthy crowd. So thank you for coming. Basically, we're really excited to have this design talk here. As you've noticed, a bunch of us here in NYUX have been trying to establish a stronger UX culture and have been working hard to bring different events. Recently, Maria Dubrovnik reached out to me and asked if we would be interested in partnering to bring this specific design talk, designing the physical in the era of the digital. And I said, absolutely, it'd be great to partner and kind of learn what you're doing across Google and kind of bring it to New York as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Maria, and she'll tell us a little bit more about the UXCC initiative that's going on at Google.
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, fantastic to see you all here. As Anthony mentioned, this talk is brought to you by UXCC, User Experience, Culture and Community, which is a new program which aims to facilitate the exchange among and build a fantastic UX culture at Google across all of our offices. The Design Talks program is an emerging program where we aim to bring some of the external thought leadership at Google and facilitate the internal knowledge sharing as well. And today we're really honored to have Karen Wong, who is the Deputy Director of the new museum, and Will and Florian, who Karen will introduce later. Karen has been working at the new museum on incredible projects such as Ideas City, which explores the future of cities with the belief that the art and culture are essential to our metropolises, or, for example, New Inc., which is the first museum-led incubator for art, technology, and design. And today, she's going to facilitate a talk about how do you design a physical space in the digital age. Please.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'm really excited to be here. At the new museum, art and tech is kind of one of our core tenets, and it's been demonstrated through our exhibitions online, through 7-on-7, our art pairing with a technologist with Rhizome, and with our incubator at the intersection of art, design, and tech called New Inc. And so when I was approached to pitch a design talk here for Google, I said, wow, this is awesome. Let me pitch a couple of ideas and bring some of my favorite people who I'd love to be in conversation with. So it's so nice to bring two gentlemen whom I both admire as well as really believe are pioneers in their fields. And what we're going to do is discuss art and technology as content, and then how do you present that content in a meaningful way. So first up will be Florian Idenburg, and I've known him for a decade. He was the Sana architect in charge of designing the new museum at our Barre location, and in 2008, he and his partner Jing Liu launched their own practice, Soil, and their practice has been focused on numerous art spaces, which he'll present in just a moment. Will Nathan is a new friend. He's been making waves with his commitment to build the first museum for digital works. He's going to explain his Don Quixote pursuit and why we need a museum like this that he's been dreaming about. So Florian, if I could ask you to present first. Will then present. We'll have a short discussion, which then I would like to open up to people who are much smarter than me for a more integrated conversation.
Thank you, Karen. Let's see, there we go. So yeah, my name is Florian Idenburg. We are architects in Brooklyn. We are about 25 people, pretty much all, I think, similar age to you guys. And I thought maybe in this context I should clarify what an architect is, because maybe you think something very different of architects. But we, as architects, we make physical buildings in real space out of real materials for real people that you can touch and walk in. They can be temporary, such as the presence of Frieze that we designed a couple of years ago when they came to New York. But mostly they are made out of concrete, steel, glass, and they are there to live in our world for a while. And this is, for instance, a artist residence space we're working on in Bushwick, and this recently a museum that we submitted for a competition in Berlin. But this one was a competition we lost, and so in some way it will actually never become physical, and it only lives in the digital. And I think it's important to understand that we as architects now all work permanently in the digital world. We design parametrically with iterations using algorithms, optimizing schemes in the digital. We then mock it up, we make physical models, and only then one version gets realized, such as this one, a gallery we did in Seoul, Korea. And so I think it's interesting to think about this in this way. Think of architects as designers of digital space, of which one iteration, one final version is actually built and realized. We can't do any updates or beta versions. There's only one sort of version. Any changes afterwards will cost money and cost a lot of time. But Karen asked us to speak a little bit more about what is sort of a digital mindset in thinking of the physical. And I'm going to show quickly 3 projects that deal with this. And what we try to do is work that creates participatory environments, spaces where you become aware of being part of a larger collective and designing open structures rather than sort of closed, fixed structures. And the first project I would like to see is maybe something that you've had a chance visiting. We did for MoMA PS1, the Young Architects program in 2010. And there we really try to understand or learn from the digital and see how the digital can inform the physical space. And so we created sort of an open, elastic structure, a structure that is permanently, can be affected by its users. It's a grid of glass fiber poles on a 20 by 20 foot spacing, connected through bungee cords and sitting on hinging poles with a number of activators that we attached to it. So these are hammocks and balls and other sort of places with which people would start to interact with the system. And so the following pictures are only pictures we found online on social media, where you see how people start seeing this environment as a game, something that they can change, that they can affect. There were a number of projects were initiated in this open structure, performances, a movie, a dance group, the dance group Body and Pole by the national champion pole dancing did a performance here. And so it's something where we had not necessarily anticipated how people would start participating in this environment, so an open and participatory space. Secondly, the collective. This is a space we did for Logan. Logan is a company that works fully in the digital realm. They do trailers for games, for video games, and they do animations, things for Lexus and other types of advertisement work. And so they are a company where sometimes, say 40 people work, but there's only 3 people that are really the company. The rest is all freelancers that come together and work on projects. And so what we decided to do is make 2 long tables where they can collectively work on projects. Everybody working on the same table, on the same space. Even the meeting room is part of the same table. You see the glass wall cuts the work table in a way from the meeting room table. And then rather than creating hard partitions or closed walls, we actually decided to divide the space up through these fabric screens. And so in some way you become aware that you're part of a larger collective, yet you have enough sort of privacy and separation to be able to work on your own spaces. And then lastly, an idea of openness. Openness we think of as both in form, so we try to design things that are not necessarily monofunctional, that cannot necessarily be understood in one way. This is a set of furniture pieces we're doing for Knoll for sort of a collaborative workspace environment. And although the forms give some sort of hint of how they can be used, they're also open for interpretation and maybe misuse. So how can people appropriate sort of these forms that are not necessarily specific, but more sort of open-ended? And lastly, I will show a museum we just completed at the University of California, Davis. This is the Central Valley, and we tried to take cues from the landscape and from the environment. The UC system, especially at Davis, is very much involved in agriculture, and so how do you make the environment part of the experience of this museum? But also, how do you design a museum for a user group for whom maybe visual culture is not something they come and see in the museum, in which they're not necessarily interested in hearing sort of top-down what art is, but it's much more something where we can create an open structure where the students themselves can actually create their own narratives and in a way construct their own spatial and content experience. And so this was an image we generated that represents sort of the idea of this museum, an open, large, permeable structure that works as an infrastructure that can be occupied, that the user can in a way give form and shape. And so this is the building as it opened actually a week ago or 2 weeks ago, a large canopy covering the site, sort of inviting students in from campus to come into this very immersive environment where light and shadow and temperature are very much part of the experience as you enter, seducing you in through this transparent lobby into the galleries. And here, the galleries organized not as sort of a sequence of space that is dictated, but open for students to browse through and create their own path. And I made one little video together with one of your ex-colleagues who used to work at Google, Richard Tay. And maybe, I don't know if the AV person can click on the link of this video, but that would be necessary. And there's some sound with that as well, where we build a model of the space or of this canopy, but maybe it will speak for itself when it will play. It's the wrong video. Still pretty cool. Wow, is that the wrong? It's no, it's one before. You know what? Yeah, there it is. Yeah, oh, good. Wow. I think it played. It was the one that followed afterwards. Yeah. I like the sound.
A lot of bass.
Yeah.
So I just want to encourage everybody here in this room to be a brand ambassador, and please encourage your friends out in Mountain View. It's about a 30, 40-minute drive to go see this museum. Florian was very generous and invited me to come along for the opening, but really he just really wanted me there to be a nanny to his 2 kids. But it was a fantastic experience, a beautiful building in person. Will, why don't you tell us about the current museum?
Yeah, let's dive in. So I'll start out with a bit of my background and then move into what I've seen in digital art and then some of the ways that digital art is being shown today, and then kind of hit the ground with some field notes from my experiences in a space in Soho that is open now through the 15th with a lot of amazing digital art. So let's dive right in. Okay. So, hold on. There we go. So the first slide was actually a bit about my background. So I started out in finance with a BS in Math Econ, did the technology mergers and acquisitions path, sold about $1 billion worth of deals, and then decided to sell everything I own, teach myself to code, and move to New York. And at New York, I became one of the first 25 employees of the tech team at BuzzFeed, and worked on time machines and dashboards and a lot of emerging advertising formats back when BuzzFeed was, very small or smaller than it is today. And then after that, I started a company called Home Polish, which was built to be how you would make interior design easy and accessible. So with that company, I really found an appreciation for space. And then after we raised some capital, I decided to take a different direction and merged a passion for art and architecture and museums with a background in tech and this design sensibility. So that's how The Current was started, when I decided one day that I was going to go find the nearest digital art museum and go help them out. And then I realized there is no museum devoted to digital art. And so that's what The Current is. Our mission is to showcase, study, and preserve works that engage technology to expand the boundaries of creative expression. And so before we talk about digital art in a physical space, I wanted just to talk a bit about what I'm seeing in digital art to begin with. And digital art is hard to describe. It's ephemeral. It evades all of the language and the tools that art history has used to describe things, whether it's new media, mixed media, post-internet, digital art. There's a lot of names that are being thrown at this art form, and it seems to evade all of them. Okay, the slides are a bit out of order, so I'm just going to wing it a little bit. So, so digital art is also very hard to conserve. The best institutions have been working on ways to find the sustainable mechanisms and technology to have works that may have been created 30 years ago, where there aren't transistors that would work anymore, and the power changes are different. And there's really a lot of challenges even to make these artworks function. And the last one is really digital art is hard to create. There's a bit of a stigma about digital art of whether it's even an art form itself. What we've seen this year, though, is that there's been an explosion of attention and a lot of activity around digital art, which is fantastic. But a lot of the digital art artists that I speak with don't like to be called digital artists. They want to be called artists and have the tech be incidental. Okay, we did that one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So so let's talk a bit about digital art, because it's an art form that's very difficult to create, conserve, and to describe, but it's definitely something special and unique. And so what I've put on the screen for you all to take a look at is a number of different examples of the ways that artists are using technology. And we'll just start in the upper left and move down. So in upper left is a piece by Claudia Hart, where she's using augmented reality and wallpaper, essentially, to create an experience. And then below that is an artist named June Pike, who's been working with digital and technology for quite a long time. And I'll also say that digital art has been around for 50, 60 years. Essentially, it began with the discovery of the semiconductor, and before that, with electricity and the way that light was used. Then in the middle, we have a Hyphen Labs VR experience, which is up right now at The Current, where they're using a completely new form of technology. Actually, if you talk to the art historians, VR is something that is extremely old, but the newest iteration of it that makes it very easy to show. Below that, we have projection-based works, and then also in the upper right, we have internet-based works that are meant solely to be contained on the web. And below that, what people traditionally think of as digital art, which is the screen-based video augmentation works. So now, where are those works going? Where are the places, and why are people showing digital art? And I've really broken it down into a spectrum, because it really isn't easy to define exactly why or where these things are being shown. But essentially, they break down into entertainment, commerce, and education. So here we've got Burning Man. We have the future of storytelling. How many people actually went to the future of storytelling? Okay. It was an event in New York where they had a lot of VR. And a thing called Birdly, which you can see, where you kind of strap yourself in and you use a Google Maps to fly around the world, which is great. The Void, which is a very commercial endeavor to take virtual reality into a laser tag experience, and then the L'Atelier des Lumières, which is a new French institution that is billing itself as a digital art museum and is creating these experiences of large-scale works from the past. Then you have commerce. So there's been a lot of companies. Who's actually seen some kind of activation or been to an event where they've had digital art that looks something like this? Okay, so this is the one that a lot of people have connected with digital art. Museum of Feelings, which was actually a promotion by Glade, for their candles. The middle one was from Refinery 29, and then Pace and Team Labs has taken an interesting approach out on the West Coast to create these experiences. And pulling these together, I actually didn't anticipate that they'd all have the same color schemes, which is an interesting insight into the ways that commerce and that companies are really looking at the public's appetite for digital art. Then we have a whole set of other types of commercial endeavors that are using digital art. On the left is Baby Castles. Has anyone been to Baby Castles? Okay, a few people. So Baby Castles is an exciting and kind of wild exploration of what happens when you have a small space that's a co-working space, but also a place that throws interesting parties and works and very, things that you wouldn't see otherwise or experience otherwise. In the middle, there's actually a Salesforce lobby with a giant wave that's falling over the doorway. And another one similar to that is Bloomingdale's just released in on their floor level of their store in Chelsea, collaboration with a digital artist. Donna Karen's done something like that as well. And then on the bottom, you have Artsy, so that's from Basel, where it's a 3D dome for VIPs to experience, which has also been projected on Facebook. And finally, you have the traditional gallery model. So there's a gallery called Gavin Brown's Enterprise up in Harlem that has created a really interesting utilization of space in an old chocolate factory, and that's one example. So then the final one is education. And so this is what people traditionally think of as the museum experience. And what's really exciting for digital art is that the New Museum and the Whitney both have incredible digital art exhibitions right now. And if you haven't been to them, by all means, you should go. They're incredible. ZKM is actually a Berlin-based museum and is one of the oldest museums that has been focused on digital art preservation and exhibition for quite a long time. So now I'd like to talk a bit about the opportunity. So we've talked about the challenges of digital art and where this art is popping up in society right now. And really, as I've been thinking about the current, I focus a lot on audience. Who are the people this is for? Is it for the general public? Is it for the art historians? Is it for some merger of the two where that you can find a happy medium between relevance and entertainment? And then patience. There was a study recently that the average person at the Tate spends between 2 and 5 seconds on a piece of work. And what I'm hoping is that digital art will encourage people to slow down. And another thing, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you go to the MoMA, most people are experiencing their works through a phone. So they're standing in front of the work, taking a picture of it, and that's the way that they're interacting. So the question becomes, how do you take a museum experience and make it something that's very immersive and interactive? And context. These works, the digital works, are very complicated, and they have a lot of meta information that I think is really important to understanding it, and also making it clear what you're supposed to even do with it. So I have a picture here of someone trying to take a selfie with a VR headset from one of our events. And then there's the reality of what it means to create a space for digital art. This is New York City. The real estate here is some of the most expensive in the world, and so the lease costs, the government regulation, equipment, electricity, and lighting, all of these things that we take for granted when we go to cultural events are very much amplified by this new art form. Even that wheelchair accessible ramp over there is required in a lot of codes, which it's a fantastic way to make sure everyone can see the art and experience it, but also makes it challenging for creating it and for putting it in front of the public. And then finally, I wanted to quickly talk about what I'm doing now at the Current. And you could see a picture from our opening, and then on the right, an image of a party we're going to be throwing on December 10th. And really, this space, which is 60 Sullivan, has been an experiment with my curator, Kelly Ray Aldridge, to find out what types of digital art are out there. How is the public most engaged and interested in looking at these works, and then what is digital art itself? And so you see there's a lot of paper works up there in addition to the screens and the projectors. And in the basement, there's actually a 3-screen immersive cinema. So really, that's what that space is about. It's through the 15th. I hope you all can check it out. And I appreciate your hearing some of my discoveries about digital art.
Great. Okay, so some of the things I've heard in both your presentations are these words: experiential, immersive, virtual, augmented, participatory, collective. And it feels like many of these art forms are closer to a word you use several times, Will, which is entertainment. So my question to both of you is, will this result in a new typology of building? Or are we doing hybrid? Are we going to go to a traditional museum model? Maybe it's closer to a science museum. Or are you telling me that I'm going to see these things more in a kind of theatrical space, like an IMAX cinema? Where is this headed?
So I think that what I found is that on that spectrum, some of the most engaging and just aesthetically pleasing works are happening in a Madame Tussauds type setting, in this immersive experience. And I think that works very well for a specific type of digital art. So the art that is meant to grab you and is meant to be interactive. And I think that a lot of those spaces are going to be designed in a specific way. They tend to do better when they're dark, when you have a clear pathway, when there isn't as much context for you to know necessarily what's going on. But then there's also other works that very much need a specific ambiance. They require, whether it's humidity or lighting or some kind of connection between the projectors. And so, for example, in the Whitney's Dreamlands, there's certain rooms that are completely dark, and they must be dark, or else you can't experience the works. And other ones that are just so bright that you can barely, see everything at once. And I think that will, determine how design is eventually shown for these.
Yeah, I think. I mean, if you speak, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but somewhere, I think some of the works, it's nice if there's a relationship to where you are in the space, and maybe you can contemplate. There's also projection on, for instance, glass, and where you see the background. I think it really depends on the work, but I think if you are able to create enough flexibility for different settings, that might be where a building will head. But I think at the same time, technology changes really fast. Gravity is very stable. In some way, delaminating these two, the structure, the spaces that need to house people, and then how does technology plug into that, but not making them too integrated, because I think then you get buildings that are really quickly outdated. So you need some sort of flexible structure, and then within that, you can create these different types of settings.
So it sounds like spaces that are dark and expensive.
Well, I think still it's very important to also realize where are we on this planet, and in some way have some relationship to the exterior, either through daylight or some sort of hint of something beyond. But it really also would depend on the artist and what the artist wants. And I think there are certain artists that are very good at thinking of that sort of in a larger setting. But at the same time, I think generally curators and artists prefer to isolate themselves maybe and let the work sort of be, be fully its own single world. So maybe this is a challenge more to curators and to artists themselves to think a little bit beyond the work itself, but then how does a work live in different settings, because these works are not made specifically for one location either.
Well, one thing I noticed just at the space at Sullivan Street is we have an upstairs and a downstairs. Downstairs is very dark, upstairs has full windows. And people react very differently to the artwork upstairs. They have more conversations, they're more engaged, they're more externally focused. In the basement, people tend just to stand still and sway in silence. And I think that actually that attitude and that experience will really drive kind of how the architecture is built.
And so maybe it's one is more augmented reality, the other is more virtual reality in a way. One is where sort of the digital coexists with the physical, and the other might be a much more immersive, VR experience only. So maybe you need to provide both.
I think the big question, though, for museums is there's a lot of good work coming out of virtual reality. I think, quote unquote, it's now been around for a couple of years. Artists are grasping the technology in a more sophisticated way, and we're trying to figure out how do you bridge this idea where essentially it's a very isolated experience. You're putting on a headset and you're completely enclosed, immersed. And so, the question is, well, why don't I just do this at home? What's the reason to bring this into a collective experience? And I guess, Will, that's really the challenge of your museum. I could probably look at most of this work at home on my screen. And so why is it that you're so sure that people are going to want to come and visit a museum of digital artworks?
It's a great question. So there's a few aspects to it, one of which is that the works that I'm showing, many of them are available online. And what I like to say is the internet is a terrible frame for digital art, in the sense that if you're looking at your phone, you don't get the same experience from flipping through the artworks we have on display now as you would with a 14-foot version, where you're forced to confront not only the work in front of you, but the concepts behind it. And there's a piece that we're showing right now about Alibaba and the ways that the global labor market is shaped. And because you have a picture the size of your face looking at another face, at eye level, I think is really important to those works. The other aspect is there's works that you just can't create at home. So that Birdly piece, which is a complicated piece of technology.
That was my favorite piece there.
It was a great piece. And then, we're showing a work that uses transducers to vibrate the door frame of the building with the same frequencies that the MoMA has. Charles Epley's work. And so in those cases, it's pretty easy to say, like, yeah, this is something that you would want to see in a physical space. Additionally, downstairs, it's a 3-screen, 3-projector enclosed space with the acoustical properties of a 15-foot ceiling. And so in a lot of ways, you can't have that same experience. But to your point, when virtual reality becomes indistinguishable from reality, my philosophy on that is that people, it's not necessarily when they want to be in that experience with other people, but when they take that headset off, they're going to want to be surrounded by other people, to talk about it, to have a dialogue, to be in a space and to experience this art somewhere where they feel a connection to the space itself.
So I absolutely find that proposition very exciting, and I guess the question to you, Florian, as we move into these new ways of presentation, I can only imagine that there will also be new kinds of exhibition formats or furniture. Have you found yourself starting to experiment with that, and certainly even maybe the furniture that you're developing with Noel seems to be like heading in that direction in terms of what kind of physical furnishings will we have so that it allows for one moment for me to be completely isolated with my headset, but then when I take it off, I'm engaged in some kind of intimate way with maybe the 2 or 3 folks I came to the museum with? Or is it more like, oh my God, we're all like sitting in chairs like that and we start like, talking to one another? I guess I'm trying to figure out what's that experience going to be like?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's such a direct effect on, or if it leads directly to new pieces of objects or furniture. What I found interesting is what you were saying also, that some of these artists, they don't want to be called digital artists, and the digital is a technique or it's a mindset. And for me, the reason why I threw in this last video is it's fully analog. It's a physical thing that happens purely through just material and print, but it sort of gives this layer of sort of a digital experience in it or with it. And so what I find maybe more interesting is to see how the digital might disappear, so to say, as something that is there, that is technological, that has wires and screens and what have you. It actually becomes much more immersed and indeed sort of a hybrid between virtual and digital, where there's a lot of digital knowledge, tools, know-how, programming, and what have you, that generates physical space in which that feels less technological, so to say. And so maybe technology will become more ephemeral, and maybe it becomes much more sort of just little, whatever, an earring or some. And in that, I don't think it's like the way you're maybe describing it now. It seems like a very large thing that in some way we need to accommodate. But I have a feeling that it becomes lighter, more ephemeral, and more embedded just in clothes and in other things. And so maybe a chair still looks like a chair, but it has sort of intelligence embedded in it. And this I think is what's going to happen. They're going to merge in some sort of way that is much less sort of a whole new set of tools that we need to develop. I think it's more the transformation of certain physical things with digital intelligence embedded in it.
And Will, can you give us a little bit of your timeline in terms of what the future holds? Because as I understand it, this is a pop-up space, but you do have plans to make a permanent museum. So what does that mean, and when will I get to come and visit?
It's a great question. I think something that I've been really focused on for this pop-up space is learning. Trying to understand who are the people most engaged with this art form, where's the market at right now as far as making something sustainable, and also learning a heck of a lot about New York City real estate, which is not related to digital art at all, but in some ways is core to this process. And there's been a lot of questions about, on the team and myself personally, about what is the best outlet for these works. Is it more of a traditional white box or white cube format, or should it be all pop-ups that are sequenced and global? And I think the jury's still out on a lot where exactly we want to go in that direction. But what I found that I think is really exciting is that the community is there, that people are starting to understand that this artwork is worth seeing. And I don't think anyone's really found the right way, out of all the different ways I've shown, the optimal way to really show that. And so, to sum it up, it's still in the experimental phase of where this actually leads.
Right. Just a note, the Pippalati wrist show that is currently at the museum, which really is an artist who has looked at technology from decade to decade through her 30 years quite seamlessly, has been surprisingly our most visited show in the history of our museum. So, and so it kind of brings me to something I'd love to discuss a little bit more. Is that we are finding that one of the reasons why this show is so popular is because the young people, millennials, teenagers, kids, love this show and have a lot of time for it, a lot of patience for it. And I know you've seen the show, and I guess I was wondering, what do you think are the characteristics of this show, which is right at this intersection of art and technology, which is making it so popular?
Well, the first time
because I want that, I need this special ingredient so we can repeat it.
The first thing I'll say is the first time I tried to see it, I couldn't get in because the lines were out the door. But I think there's a few things that I've noticed in that. One is that it is completely immersive. It's not like a picture and a square on a wall that you look at and you have all of these people directing their gaze towards one particular area. In a lot of ways, they're directing their gaze towards each other. And they're looking at a wall that's floor to ceiling, colorful, and really aesthetically pleasing. And I think that that's very similar to what was seen in the Museum of Feelings. Yeah. But in this case, there's artistic depth to it that I think makes it very special. And also the technology that's running this, the idea that you're creating an environment that people don't have to try very hard to be lost in. And I think that in some cases a museum can feel very much like an impersonal space where you don't really know what to do. And for a lot of young people, and I guess I'm a millennial too, but for the millennials out there, it can be daunting to go to a museum and not know what to touch and what not to touch. And the last part is really the furniture in a lot of ways, because people see it as a space to chill out, to relax. Everything about it says, come here, spend some time, like really understand how you're feeling, and when you feel comfortable, there's a lot going on that you can learn from. And so people do very much want to be challenged, but I think it's creating that environment that's so special.
And Florian, you've been in so many museum competitions, and you have, and you've been successful in terms of building some new museums. Have you found in the briefs that directors are calling out that they need spaces to deal with these new types of artworks, or are we still seeing something that probably won't come to more traditional museum spaces for another 4 or 5 years?
Based on the briefs I've seen, I would say the latter, meaning and it might have to do with the generation of people writing these briefs and commissioning these buildings.
Yes. Yeah.
But I don't think they're ready yet, and I don't think people have sort of cracked that nut necessarily. So I think it's still something that we need to be working on. It's interesting, now we're working on a large competition in China, and there basically the galleries are almost like movie studios, film studios. They're fully black boxes that they can do anything in that they want, but they're actually fully sealed off environments, in some way anticipating or open for whatever technology and however it will develop. But I don't think people have, on the way we're talking about it now, have really thought that through well enough. I also think it's hard though, because maybe not every artist, next time you have to do a painting show or something else. And so how specific do you make it? I was just looking at the shed that they're planning here on the High Line, which obviously needs to be this super flexible, multifunctional building. And maybe we'll see more of those where literally it is a box that can change into any type of setting possible.
And that's such a great way for me to just kind of wrap up our conversation, because as you had mentioned, digital art, perhaps called something different 50 years ago, the famous experiments in art and technology, that was a famous program started by Bell Labs engineers with artists like Rauschenberg. They actually presented their works in a box, the Lexington Park Armory. So in so many ways, it's almost like they have foreshadowed 50 years later, as this has come back around and become relevant, where we may be headed. I would love to open up the questions to the audience, and if you guys will just, it's pretty intimate, maybe just shout out the questions.
Now
I'm
echoing yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going to the second floor, it was like just everyone was either taking a Snapchat or some sort of photograph of their friends or themselves.
Do you think that's weird, or is it a good thing? I mean, we do understand that that's one of the reasons why it's popular, but would you say to me, oh, you need to make shows that are selfie friendly?
I would say that you could see a similar thing with like, the Infinity Room, Rain Room, any Terrell piece. Like they have a similar quality of being very selfie-friendly. And I'm curious because I feel like over the last decade we've seen museums go from being like no photo spaces to almost cater to people taking selfies. And I'm kind of curious from an insider's perspective, how did that conversation evolve, et cetera?
It was a really hard conversation. When I arrived at the museum, the new museum in 2006, we started to have these conversations in preparation of opening the new museum at our Bowery location at the end of 2007. And in particular, the curators were very, very resistant to having any pictures taken and being shared on social media. There was just this huge paranoia that if we were to share the pictures, people would not come to the museum. And there'd be no foot traffic, we would lose admissions. So I think maybe a year into having our exhibitions, we were one of the first museums who started to relax about it, because it just ended up being on some level a demand from the visitors. It just simply became a situation where we couldn't regulate it anymore, and we were finding that if it was being shared on social media, it became a situation where it went the opposite. It became a FOMO situation, a fear of missing out, and so then all of a sudden, if people were sharing images, you'd have a lot more folks coming, and I think now most museums have really now embraced it to a point where we're creating special days where popular Instagram bloggers get to come and see the show first because they have these huge communities. So it's been a huge kind of turnaround for the museums to stomach this, but now subsequently embrace it. And
how do artists think about it?
How do
artists? Are there artists who are not ready for that?
No, I think at the end of the day, an artist is most interested in having a lot of people see their work. So, in this case, by any means necessary. Yeah.
I think that it very much, I agree with you that's a key component, both from the experience, but also from the social media dynamics of just getting multiple people to know about something. But I think it can be both an exciting way to get more people to see digital art, but also concerning, because then you may have artists, if their goal is to have as many people as possible see the work, start to design their works around selfie moments. And one of the key differences between a designer and an artist is that an artist doesn't create things for a specific audience. They create to create. And I think that the more that people and artists realize that that is the case about the moments, the more challenging, the more odd works we'll start to see that follow that pattern that can take away from the art in some ways.
I think Jeff Koons came to that realization already. No, reflective, shiny things. It's apparently what people like to take selfies with most. It's like, no, it's true.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Is there another?
Yeah, like in a similar vein, how do you, like, as an architect or as a museum curator, accommodate this idea that, like, augmented reality apps can kind of have an external system provide value or change the value of the space that you've created?
Let's see, we like to collaborate a lot with people, and so this last installation we worked with somebody who used to be at Google, now started for himself, working out of the new lab. You know, we use technology a lot in literally designing sort of the building itself, but I think a lot of the knowledge and, say, the new developments we would have to find in collaborations, which is something we're totally open to and would be happy to sort of work with. But it sort of happens on a case-by-case basis. So it's not something that we have sort of integrated necessarily in our office or in our practice at this moment. The other thing that I think what we do try to do is something that is more than a selfie. This is maybe not necessarily answering your question, but more part of the larger conversation, where how do you create real, immersive spaces that you need to experience in a way, like where there's more than just the visual. And so I think a lot of maybe what we can learn from the digital arts and say Pipilotti, Riest, and some of these immersive environments is how do you create that with physical material, not just with technology, but actually with just steel, glass, concrete, and what have you. Yeah, I don't know if you had an answer to this question or. Yeah.
Well, as far as augmented reality, we have a piece up by Claudia Hart, which is a wallpaper piece that I had shown earlier, and that has been one of the most popular works because it takes the viewer into another dimension, essentially. And so what we're finding is that people are looking for ways to be drawn into the art, to think, to be challenged, to understand something new. And what I like to talk about that piece is it's just wallpaper, right? So when thinking about what is digital art, augmented reality creates this really exciting way to essentially make everything part of the experience. And so it's not just the wallpaper on the wall, but also the software. And then you, the viewer, yourself, because without you as the mediator between the two, the art doesn't exist either. And so I think augmented reality can be used in that context, but also as a way to help people navigate. So Ian Ching made a work where it's a little fox, and the fox tells you to go places. And I think there's a lot of dimensions to that work, but it's a way that augmented reality can really impact the experience.
Cool. Thanks. I have a question here. Whilst we see more and more digital art, VR in the museum setting, what does it mean for basically for people who work at the museums? So traditionally, curators come from art history background, and with the development of these new technologies crossing with art, what are the new skills or new backgrounds that people who are curating the exhibition should have, and how do you see this being solved?
I think Will and I can answer this question. From my point of view, there have been a lot of curators who have made this a part of their framework for a number of years, and we're really lucky that Lauren Cornell on staff is designated as our curator that oversees technology initiatives. So it's obviously somebody who has a deep understanding of, firstly, the history of, for lack of a better word, the media arts, the internet arts, the post-internet arts,
whatever you want to call it.
And to be able to parse out the language. I think, we were the first museum to actually show a virtual reality artwork, and that was in the triennial of 2015. So this is still so fresh, and I think we are, as I said, and which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to see Will's museum materialize, is It's unclear how museums as they stand now are going to be able to accommodate this new work, and will we need new spaces. We are actually going to present 6 works that were commissioned by Lauren in January of 2017. We commissioned 6 artists who wanted to use virtual reality as part of their studio practice. And the way we're having to present it is to bring a group of VIPs into our Sky Room, and everyone's going to get a headset and we'll show the works. But the way we're going to really distribute it is send out Google Cardboards, thank you, Google, to all our members, which is about, at this point, I guess 5,000 members. So they will be sent a Google headset, and we have a special app which presents these 6 new works. But you can see, in all frankness, how convoluted that is. So it is very much a space of experimentation, and as artists make their work, I guess we're just, we're winging it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it, because the technology moves so fast that it's even hard to grasp it a year later. If you look at some of the net art made in the 90s, it's extremely important, but so different than what would be created today in such a short amount of time. And I think specifically to your point about curators, the good news is that curators are very excited about all art, and this is a new form of art. And in a lot of ways, they're making extremely important parallels to historical practices in dance and other performance. And so they're seeing the connections, and they're starting to build a history around that. And I think it's critical to have a historical context for these works. Otherwise, you forget. Otherwise, you don't have a way of really knowing where things have been and where they can go, and you just end up with this cycle. But I think to skill sets, there's a need for basic technological knowledge. I mean, just in the space that we're working in now, we have upstairs about 10 works, and every one of them has a different way you boot it up and you start it up, and they all break down in very creative ways at very inopportune times. And I think that as a curator, in a small space, whether it's a gallery or our space now in Sullivan Street, is really learning some of those skill sets to better interact. And you're starting to see that in interesting collaborations, one in particular at the Guggenheim, where they're bringing in NYU students who have technology and computer science backgrounds to partner with some of the conservators. And I think you'll see a lot more of that.
Thank you.
Great. I think we'll take one last question.
Okay. So you just spoke to an example of a work that was commissioned, and then after it was produced, it was then sent out and shared outside of a museum context. And I'm curious, what is the role of organizations like The Current in producing these types of works that can actually be experienced outside of your space?
That's a great question, because I think one of the challenges with the traditional museum model is that there's an exhibition, it's 3 months, you walk in, you see it, you're gone, and you don't have that connection necessarily to the art or the institution for a pretty long period of time. And so what I'm excited about for The Current is not only to make it so that you can take the art with you, that the conversation doesn't stop when you leave the doors, but also that we can engage with artists in a new way because their platforms are different. Not all the art needs to be seen physically. Not all the art needs to be a black box. In fact, an initiative that we're considering is actually having a GitHub repository where we can host a lot of the artists' works that they decide they want to enable for the public. So in a way, we become a source of creation as well as a curation of the collection.
Great. I think we've been promised snacks, and we can certainly continue conversations on a more individual level, because I think all of us will hang out for just a bit. And so I'll turn it back over to Anthony.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen, Will, and Florian. This was really wonderful. Thank you. As Karen said, we have some beverages, some snacks. I invite you all to please hang out, socialize a little bit, ask some more questions. And if you get an opportunity to badge in, we'd love to get some feedback on the event. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Thanks.